Yes, Apple has I have no evidence. It's just what I read about Apple. Although I do have a little insight. I'm very close to one of the board of directors of Apple, a lady. And I would say from what I get, Apple has a heavy dose of Q4, Q1 in their culture. You'll see combinations, by the way. You'll see blends. There's an interesting combination is Q1 plus Q3. That's a very interesting company. I know several large companies that are very Q1 and they combine it with Q3. And if you look at it over a period of time, the Q1 in the company causes people to be very submissive and very dependent. Okay? And the Q3 that exists in the company also generates a great deal of dependency. It's because the people become very dependent on the goodies that the boss is always giving out. The boss is saying, you know, you do what I say, and I'll take good care of you, and I'll give you these little nice gifts, these presents, and so forth. What we find happens in those companies is it creates a lot of frustration. The Q1 creates frustration, and the Q3 creates dependency. Now think of the word frustration, and then add plus dependency, and you mix it up. What do you think that creates? Frustration plus dependency. Respect, did somebody say? Not respect, okay? Can you think of anything else? Frustration plus dependency. It creates hate. Some of the most companies that have the rebellions that you see, where there's chaos in the whole culture, is oftentimes a company that combines or tries to combine Q1 with Q3, with the Q1 creating a great deal of frustration and the Q3 creating dependency. You put those two together, you get anger, despair, and hate. So there are companies that combine Q1 and Q2. I've seen that. And then I've seen companies that are almost pure Q1, almost 90% Q1. And then I've seen a number of companies that are Q4. For example, right here in this city, we have some companies that have very heavy doses of Q4. I don't know if you all are familiar with Centene. Being in the pharmaceutical field, you've probably heard of Centene. They have in their mission statement that they want to, and they developed their mission statement about 10 years ago. And their first sentence of their mission statement is they want to create a Q4 culture within their organization. A.G. Edwards, which was a very active stock brokerage company in St. Louis, they work very hard in trying to produce a Q4 culture. Yes.
In the news, of course, today, and for the past few months, there's an election going on out there, and there's a guy named Donald Trump. And I'm curious, and there just seems to be such a divergency of what's going on in this country in terms of this man. You know, I mean, people hate him, they love him, and if I look at the quadrants, I mean, I'm no expert on these quadrants, so I'll ask you, if you wouldn't mind. And we won't get political, but I'm just curious, because the guy owns a company, right?
Yeah.
And it seems to be a very successful company, and if you were working for this guy, would you mind just taking a couple minutes and tell us what you think?
Well, my hobby, Bill, used to be to analyze presidential style. I used to go over to Washington University every 4 years and give my lecture on the presidential styles. And then it began to get almost politically incorrect to do that. I stopped doing it when Jimmy Carter was running, because somebody asked me to describe Carter, and I mentioned that Carter was very indecisive, that his favorite color was plaid. And a lady came up to me and punched me in the belly. Turned out she had had one too many drinks, because this was an after dinner meeting. But no, the model, you should use the model in analyzing the presidents and seeing what you see. And Donald Trump comes up with a mixture of Q1 and Q4. Mostly Q1. Yeah. But that doesn't mean he won't be a great president. Let me say this. You can be very successful and be Q1. There are a lot of very successful Q1s that I know. And you can be very successful and be Q2 or Q3. But we do know this, that it does give you a great edge if you can build Q4 in your behavior. And your style is only one part of leadership. You know, your technical knowledge, your background, your education, those are all also important features of your leadership. But being Q4, the culture that you create in Q4 is one where you're going to get better decisions and you're going to get more innovation. By the way, another great Q4 company on innovation is 3M. If you ever get a chance to visit 3M, go there and study it. It's the most innovative company that we have in this country. 3M and companies like Google, those are very, very creative, innovative organizations that put a lot of emphasis on teams and a lot of emphasis on candor and openness. And so those are correlated with Q4.
Bob, you work with, you know that many of these folks, they're
Well,
retailers, right?
yes.
Now, you told me that you have worked with many retail companies,
We do.
Fortune 500. What
We-
has been your experience within the world of retail as far as the leadership of those companies?
Well, I'm very prejudiced about retail because I worked with them so long. Like we do a great deal of work. How many of you shopped at Bloomingdale's in New York? Right, Bloomingdale's shoppers? Yeah. We've worked for Bloomingdale's for 25 years, and they have a very Q4 culture. It's very open. There's a lot of involvement. There's feedback is used as a tool for continuous improvement. They have a very collaborative, they literally beat down all the silos that you see pop up as companies get big. These silos that between different functions. In fact, I did a session with a top team in New York. This was not a retail company. It was a manufacturing company. And in the middle of our second day, it popped up that the vice president of operations had not talked to the vice president of marketing for 5 years. Now, that's not unusual. There's a lot of teams I work with where people don't communicate with each other. These two guys did it by email. They would email each other but never get together and talk because they hated each other. Now, here was the interesting thing. The president didn't know they didn't talk. Now, what would you think of a president who didn't know for 5 years that two of his key people were Q2ing each other? They were avoiding each other. That's what they were doing. Well, what would you think of a president? Let's say you were on the board of directors of that company and you found that out. What would you think?
Not doing his job.
What's that?
Not doing his job.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, his company 2 years later was on the verge of bankruptcy. So he was very Q1. One person told me he was so Q1 that at his funeral he'd need a bodyguard. Yeah, that's a pretty strong statement. Yeah. Okay.
If you don't mind, I'm a Q1, okay? And I try to be a Q4. But let me ask you a question. Now, I bet you coach many a Q1.
Yes.
It takes a while to develop these traits and these qualities, if you will, in your character. You are who you are. And in your experience of coaching Q1s, and you're telling me that 65 to 70% of leaders are Q1s, is it really possible to move to quadrant 4? I find it very difficult. I mean, I really find it very difficult to move to Q4, being a Q1. Well, how do you do it? How do you get these CEOs in these powerful types of positions to move from Q1 to Q4? Can it really be done?
The overall answer is yes, to a degree. Because a certain part of your style is in your DNA. Okay? So it's just there. It's in your genetics. And we can't do much to alter that. In the history of trying to learn how to change behavior, the first thing we emphasized was making people self-aware. We thought that becoming aware of how you come across and how you impact people was a very important thing that you needed to know. So we put emphasis on self-awareness and on what I call cognitive learning. We would have them read articles, books. After about 20 years, we found out that only about 5 to 8% of people could change just on the basis of self-awareness. In other words, I could become self-aware that I'm Q1, but only about 8% would be able to change their behavior. The breakthrough came when we learned to make people self-aware plus add skills, behavioral skills. There are learnable behavioral skills that you can practice and you can learn. Take your iPhone and record an interaction with a direct report that you have. And if it's going to be a serious interaction where you're talking about something that's very important, and after it's over, count your probes, count your questions. And here's what you'll find. If a person tends to be very Q1, they tend to ask very closed questions, closed in. They'll say, is it A or B? Is it yes or no? Or they might ask very leading questions. I'm the boss, and I say to you, you do agree with me, don't you? Well, what's he going to say to that if I'm the boss? You know. Or a Q1 will use a probe we call a brief assertion. Mm-hmm, yeah. But what you'll rarely see is a Q1 turning to a direct report and say, tell me your concerns about this issue. And how would you solve this problem? See, those are open-ended probes. By making you aware of the way you inquire, we can change your behavior. There was a CEO I worked with of a major department store, and he reported to a corporate CEO who couldn't stand this guy. The corporate CEO just despised this guy, and he was trying to help him, but he called me in his office one day and he said, Bob, I'm going to give Julie another 3 months to work out his relationship with me. And if he can't do that, I'm going to fire him. He said, I'll give you 3 months to work with him. And I asked his boss, well, what are your biggest concerns? He says, well, every time I come in there, as soon as I talk, he interrupts me. And as soon as I express an idea, he counter-argues. Well, I was introduced to this fellow, and we sat down and talked, and I knew I had a limited amount of time. 3 months is not a long time to try to change behavior, you know. And I talked to this guy for about 3 hours, and he was doing the same thing to me as he did to his boss. So I finally looked at him and said, Julie, we got a very, very tense situation here. There's got to be change pronto. And I'm going to make a suggestion to you. The next time your boss comes in, when he says something, you respond to it with 2 good open-ended probes. And then if you still disagree with him, fine. But first you got to ask 2 good open-ended probes. So about a week later, I ran into his boss. And his boss says to me, Bob, did you put Julie on the couch? And I said, why? He said, I had the best meeting with him I ever had. He said, it was terrific. Now, here, all he did is one little change from counter-arguing immediately or interrupting immediately to asking the boss to explain the idea or position that he was trying to present to Julie. And Julie, when I talked to Julie about it, he said, Bob, what I found out is when I probed, I got enough information to know what he really meant, and I really agreed with him. So I didn't have to argue with him. You know? So you see, by changing the way he questions, you make a little tweak that makes a big change. That's the beauty of behavior.
You look at damn impatient people, Bob.
Yeah, well,
They're not patient.
by the way, with this fellow Julie, to this day, he's one of my best friends. I talk to him every day. And he made a transformation from, we worked on a lot more than that, for example. I ended up working with him for a couple of years. And he became a wonderful model of Q4. But it took a great deal of effort and work to do that. Plus, we worked with his whole team. And we got his team to create a Q4 culture, which we'll talk about shortly. Any questions before we move on?
When you're assimilating a management team, and let's say you're in one quadrant, do you want to have others that are in the same quadrant, or do you want some variation from the quadrants?
Let me say this. The ideal would be to create a Q4 culture. But that takes work and time. But is it worth it? I mean, the payoff is unbelievable. Because if you can develop that Q4, just think of Q1 in decision making. Because Q1s make decisions themselves. The quality of your decisions can never go above his level of intellect. If you got a brilliant Q1, hey, that's not so bad then. He's brilliant Q1 is probably going to make some pretty good decisions. But what if he's a dumb Q1? What if he's a klutz with initiative? Then what? And he's making the decisions. Is that what you want? You want a klutz making most of the decisions? See? Think of what Q3 does. They make the decisions that make the people more comfortable, that pleases them. Is that the decisions you want? I don't think so. They're going to give away the store. Think of a Q2. They want to make decisions that don't ruffle the status quo. Keep things as they are, make neutral decisions. So what are you going to get there? And then think of Q4, where you get openness, candor, the clash of ideas. That's where you get the sound decisions. So I would say, look, it'd be great if just the boss was Q4, but if you can shoot for the team being Q4. Now, here's a fascinating concept I want you to think about. This will blow your minds away. You can have a team and say that the boss is Q4, Q1. Say he has a couple of people on the team who share his Q1. Say you got a classic Q2 on the team, a classic Q3 on the team. That team can put an umbrella over itself. We call it the Q4